So I've decided to make a little series of videos where I go over a range of different diets, some of which have gained a lot of popularity recently and some of which are just pretty confusing. So basically the idea of it is just to get a clear idea of what they all are, why you would want to do it, and just to clear some things up in common misconceptions. So when I was going to do this, I was going to make one big video about each different diet in the same thing, but when I went to write it up, it turns out there's actually a lot to cover for each topic, so I'm going to break it up into little bite-sized pieces and just separate each video. So to start, I'm going to make it one of the more simpler ones, which is the dairy-free diet. So a large amount of the population are dairy-free. Now this meta-analysis covering 89 different countries found that the global prevalence of lactose malabsorption was 68%, which is pretty huge. Now lactose malabsorption just means that they have problems with digesting or absorbing lactose, whereas lactose intolerance is pretty much the same thing, but they get other issues like stomach pains and that kind of stuff. Now the reason for this is they can't produce enough of the enzyme lactase, which breaks down lactose. Now lactose intolerance has a genetic component, but there's also other factors that affect it too, one being what occurs after breastfeeding. When a child replaces milk with other foods, the natural production of lactase just drops off. However, it should remain at a level high enough to be able to tolerate a typical amount of dairy in just a normal diet. However, if they're not exposed to it enough during this transition period, this production of lactase can just significantly drop off, which can lead to a higher rate of lactose intolerance. Your ethnicity can also play a role. For example, looking at the data from this meta-analysis, most Asian and African countries have the highest prevalence of this lactose malabsorption. So overall, they're just less likely to develop this gene of lactase persistence. When I refer to lactase persistence, that's just the ability to produce this lactase enzyme into your adulthood. Other reasons your production of lactase can just drop off can be due to serious illnesses or diseases that affect your intestinal area, which will just affect different enzymes that get released and that kind of stuff. Now let's talk about dairy and inflammation. So there is a substantial overlap between lactose intolerance and other gastroenterological diseases like irritable bowel syndrome. So if you're lactose intolerant and you're having a lot of dairy, then yes, this is an inflammatory for you and you definitely should not be having this. Now it's shown that those who are lactose intolerant can tolerate around 3 grams of lactose before experiencing any of these symptoms. So 1 cup of milk has around 12 grams of lactose, so just 1 cup of that will set them off. But they can, on the other hand, tolerate in small amounts things like cheeses and yogurts, as that does have a lot less lactose in them. Now what if you're not lactose intolerant? Now I've heard a lot out there that dairy is an inflammatory for you. That's definitely been thrown around a lot out there. When you actually look into the research about it, that's just simply not the case. Now this systematic review looked at 52 different clinical trials looking at dairy's effect on the body. Now this figure that I'm putting up shows the cytokine changes after dairy consumption. So cytokines are proteins released by specific cells in your immune system in response to what you eat or various different environmental stresses that you're exposed to. So these will just act in response and are basically just your inflammatory markers. So looking at this graph with the cytokine changes, you can see the inflammatory response from having dairy. So this black bar represents an anti-inflammatory response, the grey bar represents no change, and the white bar is a pro-inflammatory response. So as you can see here, although there are some changes in a pro-inflammatory response, the vast majority shows either no change or even an anti-inflammatory response. They then split up all the data into different subject categories and found that 85% of the studies found either a neutral or anti-inflammatory response in those who didn't have any gastroenterological issues or lactose intolerance and that kind of stuff. For those with those kind of issues, it was expected obviously for this inflammatory response to happen, which you can see in the graph as well. So unless you're lactose intolerant, I definitely think it's false to say that dairy is an inflammatory for you. They even have yogurt, cheese and milk and that kind of stuff on the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating. And I'm pretty sure they wouldn't put that there if it was as bad as some people think. Dairy is also a convenient way to get your calcium, which is responsible for so many things like increasing your bone mineral density, different enzymatic processes, your nerve function, and so many other good things associated with that. So yeah, hopefully I've cleared some things up for anyone who might have been a bit confused on the topic. Just if you are following a dairy-free diet, make sure you are getting your 1,000 milligrams of calcium per day. You can get calcium through other sources other than dairy, so things like sardines, almonds, tofu, chickpeas, They even have this tuna can in Coles at the moment that's like 800 to 1,000 milligrams of calcium per can, so that can definitely be an easy and convenient option as well. Now, if you're not lactose intolerant and you're avoiding dairy, I'm not saying that you should stop avoiding it. If it works well with your lifestyle, you're getting enough calcium every day, and you don't have to stress too much about cutting it out of your diet, then obviously it works for you and keep doing what you're doing. I'm just saying don't cut it out for the sake of cutting it out, because you could be missing out on a lot of nutrients and of course a lot of delicious foods as well. Alright, that wraps this one up. Thanks so much for listening. Hopefully this has cleared up a thing or two about this topic for anyone. If you are listening on YouTube or Instagram, please give it a like or a comment. It really does go a long way for me. But yeah, I will see you guys in the near future.